Aloha, and welcome to the final island of this month-long epic trip across Hawaii. As we enter our final week of this trip, we land on the Big Island for a week of exploring this large and rugged island. We were pretty shocked at how small Kona Airport really is, and we were through the airport in minutes and picked up our bags from the curbside carousels before hopping into an Uber and heading off to pick up our hire car. We used Churro for this part of the trip as we needed to use the car to get to the summit area of Mauna Kea, and most rental cars do not allow this. We headed up to the pickup point to get our Ford Ranger, a nice sturdy 4x4 workhorse that is way bigger than we would need. However, we did find it pretty economical for a big old truck. It was not noticeably more thirsty than the standard SUV we had in Kauai. However, the initial rental cost was quite a bit more than a standard rental company, but we just needed the 4x4 without restrictions. After picking up the car and getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, we arrived at our condo. After our fantastic accommodation in Princeville, this was more about being cheap and well located. We chose a private rental in the Kalanikai condo resort, and it was very central, but not quite oceanfront. However, the condo was actually really nice, well appointed and really spacious. The only one big downside was the lack of a view, and the odd homeless person wandering around outside. Kona is really struggling with this issue right now. After checking out the condo, we headed straight down to the seafront to try and grab a quick look at the town before dark. We barely made it, and it was pretty much dark straight away. We got a free luau show from across the bay at the Island Breeze Luau. We then walked Alihi Drive looking for a nice happy hour, ending up in the Fish Hopper Kona, which would turn into our local for the week. We ordered fish tacos and the Kahlua pork sliders with some excellent drinks. They even lit them on fire for us. We then headed back to our condo to get ready for tomorrow. Today was all about the beaches before hopefully checking a big tick off my bucket list. At least that was the plan, but our time in Kauai had kind of ruined the bucket list thing by accident, but let's talk about that later. For now, we were off exploring the beaches of the north of Kona and into Waikoloa. Starting with Mahaiula Beach, this has a really rugged access road and is totally 4x4 only, and even then, some are restricted, but this didn't stop many people heading down in totally unsuitable rental cars. We are sure the towing companies make real bank here. After a long off-road haul, we finally got to the beach to find a mother and child monk seal had taken over the beach and were being guarded by some local volunteers. We watched them swim from afar and then headed to the other side of the beach for a spot of snorkeling. The water was clear enough and there was plenty of coral, but overall an average spot despite being so remote and wild. We then hiked over to the sandy Mahaiula Bay, but the water here looked murky so we didn't stay long, and then hiked back to the parking lot and then back out over the lava field road. Further down the Queen K Highway, we pulled off at the ever-popular Kua Bay. It's not hard to see why this beach is so famous, and it has the potential to be one of the best beaches on the island. However, reality bites. This was completely overcrowded, totally ruining the experience. After fighting for a parking space, we just took a quick dip and headed off pretty sharpish. We then headed into Waikoloa to explore the fancier upmarket resorts of this area, stopping off at the Queen's Food Market for some lunch. We tried to hunt down a few turtles in the Hilton Lagoon but had no luck, and still had a long drive home, and we wanted to make sure we were back in plenty of time for the main event of the day, our nighttime manta ray dive. Here is where my bucket list comes in. I have wanted to dive with mantas all my life, and I've never quite made this a reality, despite trying really hard. However, Kona is one of the few places in the world where mantas are guaranteed. If they do not show up, you get to go out again for free. This is why we did the dive the first day, we could go again if there were a no-show. So I was pretty excited to finally tick the mantas off my bucket list. However, as we said earlier, Kauai had thrown a spanner in the works, basically prematurely ticking the mantas off for me first. By that I mean, as I was diving out on the forbidden island of Niihau, a large manta ray showed up totally unexpectedly and stole the show. This only took the tiniest bit of gloss off this dive, as more mantas is only a good thing, and regardless, Kona's mantas had a bit of a treat in store for us. Kate does not scuba dive, so she agreed to do the snorkel adventure while I geared up and hit the bottom. Our guides told us there was a 90% success rate at this site, and we had a great chance of seeing mantas this evening. On average, 2 to 4 mantas can show up, but there had only been 1 or 2 the last few nights, as the plankton they feed on was a bit light at the minute. As I hit the water, it was literally seconds to see the first ray. Dropping down, they seemed to be everywhere, and as we headed over to the campsite, the sea was just alive with these huge gliding wonders of nature. It's truly stunning. This was one of my favourite dives ever, and one of my top experiences of all time too. The mantas just kept coming, passing overhead by millimetres. Actually, many times they didn't pass at all, and slammed right into my head. Utterly magical. They just didn't stop the whole dive, and in the end our dive guide counted a whopping 14 unique mantas that night. She even had their names. I came up to the surface feeling a little bad that Kate would not have had as good an experience as me, but actually the snorkelers had been having a wild time as well, with the rays happy to take grazing passes of the lights on the surface, meaning we both got a remarkable once-in-a-lifetime experience. Thank you so much to Manta Ray Dives of Hawaii for a magical night. With amazing memories of gliding mantas in my head, I headed off for another once-in-a-lifetime scuba dive. Only this time, it was a bit of a letdown. I had wanted to dive with Kona's tiger sharks for a long time, but it can be hard to find someone who will actually take you specifically to look for them. The dive site is pretty inaccessible and has lots of boat traffic, so it's quite advanced. I managed to persuade Kona shore divers to take me out to have a look for the tigers. Unfortunately, we drew a blank. But let me be clear, this was nothing to do with the dive company, who went above and beyond to find the tiger sharks. The sharks just had other plans, and this happens when dealing with nature. My dive guide was the boss of the company, and he was more than happy to hang out in the tiger viewing area for a huge amount of time. Bottom time was 1 hour 15 minutes, and most of this was spent waiting for a tiger sighting. This wasn't to be, but we still had a great dive on an amazing reef with a ton of life. It would have been a great dive if it hadn't been for the no-show, but you can't win them all. But I have a new bogey animal after completely smashing my manta duck, although many people would be happy not to have seen giant man-eating sharks on their dive. While I did this, Kate just relaxed at the unit, running some of the Ironman course, getting ready for our trip home, and just chilling by the pool, basically having some her time. In the afternoon, we didn't have too many plans, so really just spent the time exploring Kona and grabbing some happy hour drinks and pupus at Hugu's on the Rocks, followed by a relaxing evening. After a pretty easy day yesterday, we were off on an adventure today, and that was hitting the Volcanoes National Park. This is where the island's immense size really becomes obvious, as the drive over from Kona is a long one. On all the other Hawaiian islands, any drive can be ticked off in a little more than an hour, in most cases. However, our drive over to the national park took well over 2 hours, and that was on open roads at a good pace. We know it's called the Big Island, but it's only when you get here and start exploring do you realise just how big it actually is. We paid for a single entry into the park, slightly regretting not grabbing a tri-park pass when we were at Haleakala. The first stop was the steaming bluffs overlooking the Kilauea crater. The temperature had plummeted now as we were 4,000 feet above sea level and some murky low cloud had rolled in. This meant the steam vents really showed just how warm they were, as you could warm yourself up happily in the steam. We carried on down the crater rim drive as far as the Kilauea Outlook, where we explored the trails and hiked up to the Jaeger Museum, which was actually demolished just a few days after we left. It was a little bit of a disappointment that the volcano was snoozing at this time. There'd been quite a few eruptions in the last few months and a lot of earthquakes, so we were hoping for a little more activity, but alas, Madame Pelly was taking a nap. Backtracking to the visitor centre, we then headed down to the opposite side of the crater, stopping at the marvellous Thurston lava tube. This short trail, now in deep jungle, takes you right through an extinct lava tube, which is really fascinating. Here the weather was seriously primal, with the clouds literally flowing in and out of the treetops. We were going to hike the Devastation Trail, but the thick cloud on this side of the crater meant there was little point. Instead, we carried on down the Chain of Craters road, stopping at the various eruption sites along the way. We followed the road right down the flanks of Kilauea, stopping at a few vista points where we could barely get out of the car due to the wind. Finally making it all the way down to sea level, where we took a look at the Hole Sea Arch and hiked out in scorching heat to the end of the Chain of Craters road, where recent-ish lava flows have engulfed the road, cutting it off to the north of the island. This is now the end of the line, so we backtracked up the Chain of Craters road, stopping at the petroglyph site along the way. This requires a 1-mile hike out over rough lava, but it is well worth the trip, as you can really feel the connection with the ancient Hawaiians and the indelible mark they left on the landscape. It was a long drive back up to the visitor centre and then back all the way to Kona along the Hawaii Belt Road, skirting around the flanks of the colossal Mauna Loa volcano. It had been a long and tiring day, and probably best explored from high-low, but we had other plans for our time there and wanted to get the national park ticked off. For dinner, we headed to the pool to cook up some local shrimp that we had picked up on the resort barbecue. This was a nice setting and we had the company of some neighbourhood cats, but unfortunately, the mosquitoes seemed to consume more of us than we managed of the shrimp, so we darted back to the condo to hide under the cover of air conditioning. This was a moving day, and as such, we didn't have much planned, but it ended up being a bit of an epic. This started off with me heading out and completing the Ironman racecourse. If you don't know, Kona is the iconic location of the Ironman World Championship and the birthplace of the sport of the stupid. I myself am a 7 times Ironman competitor, so I've always wanted to visit this mecca of the sport. I never quite made it via qualification, but here I am under my own steam, so wanted to have a token go at the course. I didn't have 17 hours to spare, or a bike, but I still headed down to the Kailua Pier to strike out on the swim course. I left this a bit late in the trip as a heavy swell was moving in and the bay was now getting really rough. Large breakers were building and the water was murky and heavily silted. I kept the swim short, sticking to the buoys that lined the start area of the course. After this, I was onto the run. I had skipped the bike and the first 25 miles of the run course, but completed the final mile running down Alihi Drive to the rapturous applause of an imaginary crowd in my head. If you do the start of course and the finish, that counts as the whole course, right? After my absolute token gesture at the Ironman course, we then packed up the condo and headed out to breakfast. We had pre-selected our location here based entirely on their willingness to put the European Championship football final on the TV. We had been following England's progress through the tournament the whole trip, watching the games with sea lions in Monterey, aboard catamarans in Kauai, and overlooking the ocean out on our lanai in Princeville. Somehow, we made it to the final, and we were going to watch it during breakfast in the fish hopper on Alihi Drive. To add to the excitement, the swell had really ramped up and huge waves pounded the seawall, showering Alihi Drive in torrents of seawater. After the game, which ended very disappointingly, we were still not quite done with this side of the island, and headed up to one of the best snorkel spots in Hawaii. We are pretty defensive of the snorkeling in Maui and love the huge variety of snorkel sites there, and maintain it's the best island for snorkeling in Hawaii. But as far as a single site goes, Two Step takes the award. It's a staggeringly beautiful site, filled with fish, teeming with life and flooded with beautiful light that makes the abundant coral really pop. The coral fringes of the reef are stunning and the water clarity nearly perfect. I just couldn't stop diving down and taking in the beautiful underwater setting. And as a final treat, and a parting gift from Hawaii, as if to make up for the loss of the Euro final, I got ambushed by a pod of spinner dolphins. It is a federal offence to remain in an area where spinner dolphins are resting, but this pod circled around me, blocking off my retreat. However, once they had passed, I headed straight for the shore, beaming ear to ear at this happy accident. The last few days had whistled past, and it was time to move on again. This would be our last stop and our final destination, as we headed over the epic saddle road that passes between the two great volcanoes of Hawaii, towards the sleepy jungle city of Hilo. Mahalo for coming along with us on this adventure. We still have a fair bit planned for Hilo, so join us for the last video in this series as we head up to the summit of the tallest mountain on Earth. See you there.